Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining me for a new episode of the Women's Eye podcast. We are brought to you by the Casco Financial Group in Phoenix, Arizona. Casco's president, Catherine Scrivano, started her business to help people like you create the financial strength to achieve your dreams. I'm your guest host, Laura Munson. The Women's Eye has been a wonderful support of my work, from my memoir, This Is Not the Story You Think It Is, to my novel, Willis Grove, to my upcoming book called The Wild Why, Stories and Teachings to Uncover Your Wonder, coming to you in April 2025, to my acclaimed Haven Writing Retreat in Montana, where I am today. I love that they included me in their anthology, 20 Women Storytellers, and I'm thrilled to be a guest host on their wonderful All Things Women podcast. As you know, we always like to have you meet fascinating women who are making a positive difference in some way, women who light up the world with their passions and missions. I have a special guest to introduce to you today who will indeed light you up, and her passions are contagious. She is the memoirist Lynne Spriggs O'Connor. Welcome to the Women's Eye podcast, Lynne. You can unmute yourself. Hi, and
Thank you. Hi.
welcome. So I know, and you're in Montana too. Where are you in our fair state?
I'm in Maine actually right now.
You're in Maine. Well, you
I'm
look
in
like
Maine.
well, if you were at home in Montana, where would you be? Somewhere in the
I'd be,
middle of the
uh,
state, right?
yeah, I'd be in a beautiful mountain valley right now,
Well,
enjoying the scenery.
Montana misses you. I'm sure you're having a great time in Maine, though. And I would like to read your bio before we get into our conversation. So, Lynne Spriggs O'Connor is the author of Elk Love, a Montana memoir. I was lucky enough to blurb it while conducting research for her PhD in Native American art history from Columbia University in New York City. She spent 10 consecutive summers on northern Montana's Blackfeet Indian Reservation. After moving to live in Montana, she curated a 3-year project called Bison American Icon, a major permanent exhibit for the C.M. Russell Museum on bison in the Northern Plains. For the past 15 years, she has lived with her husband on a cattle ranch in an isolated Montana mountain valley east of the Rockies. Her life centers around writing, family, and animals, dogs, horses, and cattle, as well as elk, mountain lions, beavers, bears, and other species. We know them all well when we live here, and other species in the surrounding national forest. The ranch's old growth grasslands also provide habitat for over 90 bird species. In 2021, O'Connor and her husband partnered with the National Audubon Conservation Ranching Initiative, utilizing regenerative grazing practices to help sustain this increasingly threatened habitat. Elk Love is her first memoir. So welcome, Lynne. Welcome to the Women's Eye podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I'm just as a fellow Montanan, I'm so impressed and I'm so excited to share you with the Women's Eye platform and podcast viewers, all of you, because you're a one of a kind kind of a woman and human. So, as your story opens, we find you as a single woman in her 40s, struggling, not at all comfortable with where she's landed. 1 year earlier, we learned you left everything behind: a city life in New York City, then Atlanta, academic training from an Ivy League university, a professional career as art curator at a world-class museum, and you made a surprising decision to move to rural Montana. So I want to ask you, because I know people are interested in moves, extreme and radical moves like that. Why did you move, and why Montana? Was it the answer or a solution to something that you were looking for? Did it deliver? Talk to us about this move, this courage.
Oftentimes, these sort of radical changes are the catalyst is pain of some sort or another, right? And for me, it was physical, mental, spiritual. I just was at that moment in life that I think many of us, in fact, all human beings reach at one point or another, where we just hit rock bottom. And everything was telling me that I needed to make a radical change. And so I decided to leave everything behind. And Montana came to mind because, well, a number of reasons. One, those 10 summers that I spent on the Indian reservation, on Blackfeet Indian Reservation, from that first summer, the landscape was so stunning, right? It just takes your breath away. And it got under my skin. And there was this little voice whispering to me for a long time, and I hadn't listened to it. But I thought maybe this is the time to listen to it. It was my healing place. I also knew that I needed to go someplace. Here was the hope that I needed to surround myself with a landscape that would be like a mirror, and it would reflect back to me constantly what I knew I needed to try and find in myself, a sense of spaciousness and a sense of beauty. Beyond that, I knew nothing. I just said, I'm going. And it turns out that not knowing was the answer, because, we all get so caught up in certain of and what we can control and plan and strategize and fix and organize in our lives. That wasn't working for me anymore. So I dropped myself into this place of not knowing, this
Yeah.
place of mystery and wildness, and just decided to open my heart and see what happened.
Beautiful. You hold a torch that a lot of people are too afraid to hold. So thank you. That's, what day did the book come out? It just came out pretty recently, right?
June 18th.
June 18th. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I find most memoirists get in the way of fan mail is thank you for helping me know I'm not alone. And I think that this message can translate to anybody out there who knows they need a change. And that sometimes requires an internal move, and sometimes it requires an external move to have the internal move happen. So I want to talk about that a bit, the internal world. So Elk Love begins with feelings of separateness, not belonging, loneliness, and grief. But gradually, your memoir shows your gradual immersion into a variety of unexpected intimate relationships. So, can you say more about this immersion experience and about the relationships that began revealing themselves?
Sure. I mean, at 42, I was still on my own. I'd never been married. So I had this profound sense of loneliness. And I think we're living in times where there is this sort of pandemic of loneliness, right? A lot of us feel lonely. And I just knew that I needed to address that. And so in coming to Montana, I just wanted to observe. I wanted to just quietly be with life, however, whenever, in whatever forms and shapes it was revealing itself, not as an end to some goal, right? I mean, that's usually how we use life. And so it was an entirely different way of approaching and being in life, being instead of doing. I mean, you hear that a lot, but I took as much time as I could to really just drop myself down a couple of gears and spend time in nature and be mindful, which means to observe and to listen in quietness, in silence, without judgment.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing. We're not encouraged to do that very much in this life of, it's never enough. It's never enough. I don't have enough friends or enough likes on the internet, or I don't have enough clothes, or I don't have a good enough job or a good enough relationship. And to shake loose of all of that pressure and never being enough, and to really drop down into nature. And what I found in that was profound, because loneliness gave way to what the wonder of interconnectedness. And I
Yeah.
realized the craziness of the perception that any of us are ever alone. When we're in nature, everything in nature is telling us constantly, hey, we're all in this together. Nothing is alien. There's no alienation in nature. Everything belongs. That was a pretty big deal.
Oh, yeah. I believe that we are nature, and I know you believe that too. And that's one of the themes in my novel, Willis Grove. Jane, the character that lives outside of New York City, says, I've had such a profound experience here in Montana. I'm just afraid when I go back home, out here in nature is what she says. When I go back home, I won't be able to bring it back home. And I hear that a lot over the 30 years I've lived here when people come from urban areas, and I'm originally from an urban area, and you've lived in urban areas. They say, I love being out in nature. And I think a book like yours teaches people that we can capture what we learn here and bring that with us wherever we go. But the lessons that you live here, they just deliver themselves up in a big whopping dose every day. So I want to talk to you about hiding because I think you have such an interesting spin on it. And it's a prominent central thread in your book, this experience of hiding. So talk to us about what you learned about hiding, and can it also be about presence? That's what I think you were touching on before. I think a lot of us think of hiding as like retreat, surrender, hiding because there's a force out there that we don't want to contend with. But you found out some really beautiful lessons that hiding taught you. Can you talk to us about those?
Yeah. I mean, when I decided to run away from everything, it's running away, right? And
Mhm.
that doesn't sound strong or capable or acceptable in my world of taboos and cultural understandings. Um, and I ended up over the course of time becoming more and more um, separate from human culture, human world, and more uh, alone in nature, where to the point where would become invisible. And my humanness, and I would just observe. I could feel into more of my animal nature. And I think that, I mean, I was a perfection. I am a perfectionist. I'm a recovering perfectionist, recovering academic, preacher's kid, firstborn. So I had a lot of super achiever, stuff inside of me. And to begin to understand that there is great deep value in not doing, in not knowing, and in fact, in hiding. And I learned that by being in nature. Look at animals. They hibernate, they go underground, they cocoon, they nest when birds are nesting and they're having they have their eggs underneath them. They're they're quiet. They go completely quiet because they have to be safe. They have to protect. And that sense of patience, there's a lot of patience in my book. It's a slow burn romance, if you like that. Um, Shyness, rest, um, just coming back to the body and pulling in for a while. That in fact, that's super, super important when we are going through moments of transformation in our life. And I really came to value that and to not judge myself about that and
Yeah.
see that it's really something important. And presence, of course, then when we're being quiet and internal, the presence comes much more easily. Like, just breathe into it.
Yes, thank you for that message. It's so important to all of us, no matter where we are in our lives or where we are in the world. And so you use the word wild in a way that's interesting to me, and it's in the title of my next book, The Wild Why. And so I want you to talk to us about the, so you've had all these interesting experiences. Was it wildness or what is wild that most spoke to you? Like the state of being wild or the things that made wilderness happen around you and taught you the lessons? It's kind of a cryptic question, but I have a feeling you'll be able to answer it in an illuminating way. Talk to us about wildness.
I think for me, it was mostly about, and you see this in the story line, disconnecting or releasing myself from ideas of what I needed to be as a woman, as an academic, as someone who dwelled in cities, um, someone who was smart and had a PhD, all of these things that get layered onto our sense of self. And I was choking. It was crushing me. So it was a matter of stripping away and releasing those ideas, those perceptions of self, and opening myself to stuff that was pretty scary, like ideas of both precious and disturbing in everything. Everything that is alive has qualities that are both searing and stunning, precious and disturbing. And I always was trying to hide, to repress the parts of me that were disturbing or uncomfortable in situations. And that's a lot of me, to be honest, with other human beings. I'm much more comfortable with other kinds of animals. And so stepping into that and learning how to invite those parts of me to the fore and to step into them and to feel what they're like by being in nature with other animals and seeing that, a mountain lion is not thinking, gosh, I'm a little too violent. I better tone it down a little, right? Everything in nature is so authentically itself. It's brilliant. A rattlesnake rattles and it's warning you. It's saying, hey, I'm uncomfortable with where you are. Back off. And a deer, when it stomps its hoof and huffs at you, it's telling you the same thing. So I was learning through the languages of other animals how they were expressing their full selves, not just the beautiful bucolic deer in the field that we usually see, but a deer that's upset, a deer that's afraid. And I wanted to be able to be okay with all of me. And I think that's where that freedom of wildness, that's what I mean by that.
Ah, it's beautiful. I have some more questions for you, but I feel like you answered them in your own way because I did want you to go into the other creatures with beating hearts in the book, or just alive creatures. I don't know. Does a dragonfly have a beating heart? I don't know. I don't think dragonfly. I don't
Well,
know.
I've had a long-standing fascination with the concept of alchemy and transformation. And, each moment cells in our body are changing, dying, and being reborn. And there's a lot of alchemy in Elk Love. There's that heat. In the heat of things, I'm changing into something else and I'm being changed. And I think we all feel that heat, that friction that rubs to create a pearl, right? And this is sort of a true life story of someone putting themselves in the heat. And there's a character called Phyllis, who is sort of a playful trickster figure. And there's a male figure, love interest called Harrison, that's kind of half man, half beast. And we create a lantern using willow branches that looks like a butterfly chrysalis. And we build a bridge that crosses symbolically from one world to another. And so that idea of inviting conversations between what we know and what is completely unfamiliar, or maybe between what's comfortable and uncomfortable, or invisible and invisible, that's where I like to live. And that's a lot of what Elk Love is about. It's an invitation to step into our own comfort zones or discomfort zones and heal as a result.
Yeah. It's a great book. I want all of you to go out and get it. And I also would be remiss, Lynne, as a writing teacher and retreat leader, not to ask you about process. You're an academic. I work with lots of academics that want to move more into the creative zone, although I think that there's creativity in every single thing, including academia, everything. But creative writing. So what was the process like for you, Lynne, going from being an academic writer who had to perform on a certain level to get letters after your name, et cetera, to being a memoirist, writing past the fear of exposure? That's often hard for memoirists, but to be more scene driven in your writing and to capture your life in this beautiful and heartbreaking thing called life out here in Montana. What was that like for you, process wise?
Excruciating, exhilarating, mind blowing in every interpretation of that expression. It was full of grace, Laura.
Hmm.
The writing process is so full of grace. I'd always kept journals, but I had sort of almost imprisoned my writing. Maybe that's too extreme, but I had definitely framed my writing within academic formal sort of constructs. And again, those constructs were just like, oh, I needed to break out of them. And fortunately, I met someone who could guide me through that beautiful and amazing and quite difficult at the beginning transition, where you do have to learn about the arc of a narrative and narrative tension and, ending and beginning with a positive or negative charge and all of these interesting sort of how to tell. I spent a lot of time with the hero story with, Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell and the whole deal. And a lot of magic. I guess that's the most amazing part of it when you step into creative writing. And for me, visiting my own life and looking at it, because the story takes place 20 years ago. So you've got two different voices, right? You've got the author and you've got the narrator. And one person is right there 20 years ago having it happen. And then there's an older, wiser person that's looking at it from this distance. And that was really interesting to sort of play with those and to just see how things just come to you. It took me 12 years. And I come to find out that's not particularly unusual. I thought it was crazy long. But it was really an incredibly satisfying process that by the time I reached the end of writing it, whether I published it or not, whether a lot of people read it or not, that was important to me only because I wanted to have my book be an opportunity to share the grace that I felt I had experienced in this whole storyline. But the writing itself was an absolute gift.
Yeah. Okay. I have to, again, I would be remiss. So for those of you out there who want to write a memoir, what Lynne is talking about, if you're working with me, I call that current narrative, the one in reflection, the wise narrator. She's wise because she experienced it, and she's wise because of it. Like she knows this, she knows what happens. But then to have the courage, again, I'll say courage to go back into the point of view of who she was 20 years ago is so interesting. And so many of you who are interested in capturing a time of your life that happened a while ago, I think you can tell that story, but it's much more interesting when we have a more current, reflective, wise narrator voice, because here's why, because it's not just that it happened, and it might be very fascinating, whatever this thing is that we're chronicling, but it's why it's important to the person in reflection. So this is my last question, and that is, so I always tell my clients, it's like, it's not just that it happened, it's why it's important to you and why you need to go back and revisit what's in many cases, oftentimes painful stuff. But I don't think so as much in your case. But what I want to know is, why did you need to go back into it, into that time of your life? And what did you learn from that experience of capturing it in your memoir, reliving
Well,
it?
and initially the whole thing seemed so crazy. Like, what did I just do? Moving to rural Montana. Oh my God, where am I? And you know, I mean, it was different. Everything was different. I was no longer surrounded by a lot of like-minded, like-thinking people. It was very, very different. And I knew that I needed to open to that instead of standing around, well, I don't believe this or I don't believe that. I wanted to learn. So, and then I met this man who was a hunter, and I thought hunting was horrible. And he had all these crazy things going on in his life. I was going to hunting camps with all these brotherhood of men, and I thought, I'm going to go Looney Tunes if I don't start writing about this. So I kept journals. And that really, Pico Iyer always says, great travel writer, whatever you're experiencing, if you feel like it's important dialogue or an important experience, an important moment, write it down. You don't have to write it all down, but just capture the taste of something, the smell of something that's going to bring that back to you later when you go back to revisit it and use it, perhaps. So I was doing a lot of that. And as I said earlier, the primary reason that I wanted to write this story, I wasn't working through a lot of old stuff. I'd been to therapists. I'd worked through all that crap. Now I was like, this is my new life that I worked so hard to get to. And look what it can become when you put yourself through that muck and you get to the point where you have stripped off enough that you're really, really ready to say yes to your life, whatever it can be. That's what I wanted to write about because it was so exciting. And I wanted to share the amazing, miraculous wonder that came to me from life when it heard me saying, I'm ready.
Yeah, I love it. It's a love letter to that time in your life.
It is. And I wanted
And
to share it with other people and give hope.
And who doesn't want to live in a hopeful time and revisit that time of great love and discovery? Lynne, thank you so much. You can learn more about what Lynne is up to over on her website, which is lynneoconnorauthor.com. Is that right? Lynne O'Connor
That's right.
with
Yep.
an OR.com. Lynn, thank you for being here today. And I'm just going to do a quick sign off here, so stay with us. But it's just a total pleasure. And I've already invited myself to come over there and go horseback riding, play with your critters, and go bird watching. So get
Well, come
ready.
on.
You can
Thank you,
uninvite
Laura.
me after we're off the air, but for now, I'm going to take it as a yes.
Good.
It's been a total pleasure. You can learn more about Lynne also and her book Elk Love, which you should hold up right now. Hold up that beautiful book.
Okay.
I
Here
got
it
to
is.
I got to blurb it. What's the blurb?
And if you go on my website, you can see a 2-minute video that will give you a really cool flavor of what the book is about. Everybody has 2 minutes, right? Go on my website, watch my trailer, and then see
That's
if
right.
you want to journey with me.
See, she's taken
And
a
Laura,
book.
Laura, wait a minute, I have to find. You challenged everybody. You said this book challenges everybody. What will it take for you to step into experiences of true wonder? And that you caught it, baby. That's it. That's what this is about.
I'm just so glad we do this. And I want to thank the Women's Eye. You can go over to their website, thewomanseye.com. You can learn more about Lynne and her book and all the other authors that I've had the honor of interviewing over there and all the other wonderful interviews that are over there. Books. You can also find the Women's Eye books, 20 Women Changemakers, and then also 20 Women Storytellers. Again, that's at womensstorytellers.com, and shop wherever you buy books and at changemakersbook.com. And of course, you can go over and see what else Lynne is up to at her website, LynneO'ConnorAuthor.com. Thanks again, Lynne. And
Thank you.
you're
And
welcome.
thanks, Woman's Eye.
It's been a wondrous pleasure. And thanks to all of you for tuning in to the Woman's Eye podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. I'm Laura Munson. And remember, it's the world as we see it.